So, see, robo lawyer, even though a person might have done something which is wrong and might on the surface appear as though they have actually committed a crime, that's not necessarily the case, because person actually has to be criminally responsible before they can be found guilty. Now, first of all, they've got to be over a certain age and have a certain capacity to understand what they're doing was wrong. And there's a whole long list of offences there, which including the defence of accident, and that comes up in our criminal code under section 23 of the criminal code. We've also got things like mistake of fact, and that's different from mistake of law, because if you do something unaware of it's against the law, that's no defence. But if there is some fact there which you're mistaken about, and like for example, the example I've always given is to heroin, if you think it's sugar or something, or icing sugar, well, maybe that wouldn't quite stand up rather. Make mistakes sometimes, don't they, Robert? People have been saying they haven't heard you say much. Well, I guess you'll talk when you need to. But so this idea of criminal responsibility is fairly important. And when you're looking at a possible offence, you've also got to look at the possible defences. What's that, Robo? You want to know about the difference between strict liability, absolute liability, and those sorts of offences? Well, with the absolute liability offence, generally there's no defence permitted. With the strict liability offence, defence of mistake of fact tends to be allowed, and with other offences, generally there has to be this guilty mind component as well, and that's got to be established, and that's got to be established by the prosecution. What's that, Robo? Does the accused person have to ever establish anything? Because you think the prosecution has to establish facts beyond reasonable doubt. Well, that's true, but sometimes in the case of the accused person raising a defence, the accused has to establish that defence on the balance of probabilities. What's that, Robo? You think the accused has an easier job than the prosecution? That's very true. They do, because the prosecution's really telling the story. The accused person doesn't have to establish anything. It's only in certain cases where they're relying on certain aspects of a defence that they have to raise it, because otherwise the prosecution will be there saying, oh, they've got to disprove all possible defences, which would be virtually impossible. So, yes, what changes to the law have there been? Well, there have been changes to the law with double jeopardy. I think people understand that now. And that's probably come about because of changes in technology, so that where compelling evidence comes about at a later time, it's possible for the offence to be retried, whereas previously it could be a person who could plead autrefois, that's French, meaning otherwise, other time, but it's otherwise convicted or acquitted of it. So that's what we need to be aware of there. And yes, even people who have helped with the offence can be found criminally responsible as well, maybe as an accessory. They're not what's called a principal offender. So yes. So if you go and drive a car in a robbery, you can be you're guilty of an offence too. And if you attempt to commit an offence, even if you don't actually do it, you can be found guilty of the offence. Yes, a fascinating area, this criminal law, isn't it? Where are all your friends? What's that, Robo Lawyer? They're doing their assignments. Okay, so just the two of us today. Okay, well, that's good. And I guess the other thing we need to talk about is this mitigation of penalty, where there are factors which a court can take into account in deciding how severe a penalty to impose. That's right, Robo. You can't do that. If there's mandatory sentencing, that doesn't work. No. So that's one of the reasons why people think mandatory sentencing sometimes is not appropriate. It's not a good idea. You need to be aware of that. And what's that about all the criminal law? Well, most of the criminal laws are found in legislation now. And I know some people have been looking at aspects of the criminal law for their assignments. And some people have actually been looking at Commonwealth criminal law as well. But Commonwealth criminal law covers Commonwealth matters as much as the state criminal law covers state matters, but it's not all in the criminal code. There's some other legislation which create criminal offences as well. Yeah. So, how are people meant to know the law? That's a good question. Everyone's presumed to know the law. Well, they're not. Some people say that's not true, but a mistake of law is no defence. So it's a bit tricky, that. Yes, that area. Probably use a bit of common sense. Probably a good way to decide whether or not something's against the law. And what's that? Do all countries have the same laws? The answer is no. So one of the things people have to be very aware of is what's perfectly legal in one country may be quite against the law of another country. And it doesn't matter if you're from another country and you break the law. You're still subject to the criminal penalties. Yes. So something people find a bit hard. Mostly it's fairly common, sort of criminal law about offences against people or property, but well, we'll leave that go. But yes. You're worried about those past exam questions with the criminal law problems. Well, I really didn't expect a lot from people there. I thought perhaps they could put forward ideas about what offences might have been committed, and perhaps what defences might be available as well. What's that? There's no real right or wrong answer. Well, in multiple choice questions there are, Robo Lawyer. I hope there are. But yes, in some of the other problem type questions, you just write and discuss things. You don't have to come to a definite conclusion. You get credit for writing about it, for talking about the issues. That's the important thing, to talk about the issues so that a person marking your paper knows that you're in the right area, you're talking about the right material. Okay, so that's our criminal law for this course. We'll come back and talk about family law. Yes, that's I tell you what, Robo, I've been having to update that family law material because they keep changing it on me from year to year. It's very hard. It really keeps me on my toes. Yes. Well, with some of this was updated too. I think some of the criminal law stuff was updated too. I had to put that in. Yes. Okay. Yes. What? Yes. Limitation periods. Well, I think I explained that in the lecture. So that's important because with criminal law, there's no limitation period. With civil law, civil matters, there's usually a limitation period after which you can't bring an action. But because criminal law is a matter against the state, and it's fairly serious stuff, we have no limitation period. Well, we might say goodbye, Robo Lawyer. Well, goodbye, everyone, and that includes the material on criminal law and criminal liability.